It's December 7th, 1941. Hundreds of Japanese planes are inbound. Battleships are about to burn. One of the worst days in American military history is minutes away. But we're changing one thing. Sitting in Pearl Harbor is a ship nobody there has ever seen before. An Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, pulled straight from the modern U.S. Navy with everything it came with. Full weapons loadout, onboard systems, 330 sailors who know exactly how to run it. The sailors would obviously know what's coming. We're not counting that. This is purely about what the ship can do against what Japan actually sent that morning. It only gets what it physically carries, nothing that relies on satellites or tech that won't exist for decades. If you saw this thing pull in, you'd probably just be confused. Where are the gun turrets? Why does it look so plain? The ship has 4 massive flat octagonal panels built right into its body, each one facing a different direction. Those are the SPY-1D phased array radar, and Japan has absolutely no idea what's about to happen. Contact. The Japanese strike force launched from 230 miles north of Oahu at 6 a.m. 353 aircraft. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, high-level bombers, fighters split into 2 waves. Wave 1 was supposed to hit at 7:48 a.m., nearly 2 hours of flight time away. The Burke would pick them up before they got within 200 miles. The SPY-1D tracks hundreds of aircraft simultaneously, processes everything automatically, and builds a complete tactical picture within seconds. No radar operator squinting at a screen trying to count blips. The system does it on its own. In the real attack, Army radar operators at Opana Point actually did pick up the incoming Japanese planes and reported it. They were told it was probably American B-17s inbound from the mainland and nobody acted on it. The Burke doesn't have that problem. By around 6:30 a.m., the ship probably has a clear picture of exactly what's coming, from where, at what altitude, and how fast. The surprise attack stops being a surprise about 80 minutes before the first bomb would have fallen. The crew goes to battle stations. The harbor gets a warning. The Japanese are still over an hour out with no idea any of this is happening. Missiles. The Burke carries 90 launch cells. In a realistic wartime loadout, a big chunk would likely be Standard Missile 2s. The SM-2 reaches out to 90 nautical miles and flies at over Mach 3. A Japanese Kate torpedo bomber cruises at around 160 miles per hour. A Zero fighter tops out around 330. The SM-2 travels at nearly 2,300 miles per hour. There's really no comparison. At about 90 miles out, the Burke would probably start shooting. Here's where it gets interesting. The ship's radar guides each SM-2 through most of its flight, but for the final seconds before impact, the ship has to paint the target using one of its 3 dedicated radar beams, locking onto the aircraft so the missile can home in on the signal bouncing back. 3 beams, 183 incoming aircraft. The system juggles all 3 in perfectly timed fractions of a second, lighting up each target just long enough for a missile to finish its run before switching to the next one. Against slow propeller planes from 1941, that's probably not even a challenge. The targets are spread out enough that the system works through them methodically. The Japanese pilots would have no warning throughout any of this. They had no way to detect an incoming missile, nothing to tell them they were being targeted. By the time anything was visible, it would already be over. Their tight formations make it even worse. A coordinated 1941 attack required everyone flying close together, but the missiles don't need a direct hit. The blast radius is wide enough that taking out one plane likely damages the ones flying right next to it. Realistically, the Burke probably uses around 40 to 50 missiles and destroys somewhere between 75 and 85% of Wave 1 before a single plane reaches Oahu. What's left wouldn't be a fighting force, just scattered pilots with no ability to coordinate the precise timing torpedo runs require. You can't improvise that when half your squadron just vanished. The gun. Whatever makes it through runs into the 5-inch deck gun, firing up to 20 rounds per minute with radar-guided aim. Against 1941 aircraft, that's overkill. The Kate carries no armor and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Its only defense is a small machine gun in the rear cockpit, roughly the equivalent of a rifle. Japan built it that way on purpose. Strip the weight, maximize range and bomb load, and rely on fighter escorts to handle threats. The problem is, no escort in existence can do anything about this ship. A Kate on its torpedo run also physically cannot maneuver. Pilots were trained to come in at about 65 feet above the water, perfectly level at exactly 160 knots. Any deviation and the torpedo either skips across the surface or dives too deep. They're committed to a straight, slow, completely predictable approach. And the ship's targeting system was basically made for exactly this. The Val dive bombers are a slightly harder problem, coming in steep from altitude. But a Val pulling out at the bottom of its run is momentarily slow and level, fully exposed to a system that's been tracking its entire descent. Last resort. If anything still makes it to within about a mile, it meets the Phalanx. 6 barrels, 20mm rounds, 4,500 per minute, completely automatic. It detects, tracks, and opens fire on its own, putting rounds not where the target is, but where it's going to be in the next fraction of a second. A Zero crossing that zone at 300 miles per hour would have rounds filling its flight path before the pilot registered anything was even firing. The Phalanx was built to kill supersonic anti-ship missiles that are actively trying to dodge at the last second. A propeller plane from 1941 is almost leisurely by comparison. Nothing is getting through here. The counterattack question. Here's where things get more complicated. The ship's shorter range anti-ship missiles top out at around 65 nautical miles, and the Japanese carriers sitting 230 miles north are well beyond that. The better option is the SM-6, a supersonic missile with its own built-in radar that can lock onto ships well beyond 200 nautical miles and guide itself to the target without the ship steering it the whole way. The catch is that the SM-6 normally gets targeting updates from a network of aircraft and other ships, and none of that exists in 1941. Without it, the Burke would be pointing the missile toward where the Japanese fleet was last known to be and trusting the missile's own radar to find them. 6 carriers, 2 battleships, and a full escort screen isn't a small radar return. So it probably would lock onto something, but it's not the clean, guaranteed shot it would be in a modern fight. Whether command would even authorize a strike before a formal declaration of war is a whole other question, and in 1941 that decision ran all the way to Washington. The morning that didn't happen. Wave 1 gets largely destroyed at range. A handful of survivors can't pull off coordinated attacks. Battleship Row takes minimal damage, if any. Wave 2 launches from carriers the Burke has been tracking for 2 hours, into a defense that's been fully ready since before sunrise. The harbor facilities, fuel storage, and dry docks, which Nagumo chose not to hit partly out of fear for the missing American carriers, partly because night carrier landings in 1941 were genuinely dangerous, and partly because he figured he'd already done enough, survive completely intact. Admiral Chester Nimitz later said that leaving the fuel storage alone would have prolonged the war by 2 years. In this scenario, there's no successful attack to call complete, so that mistake doesn't even factor in. The Pacific Fleet doesn't get wrecked on a Sunday morning. The war in the Pacific starts from a completely different position, and that single shift changes everything that follows. One ship, that's it. And what if a modern bomber fought at D-Day? Watch the video you now see on your screen. Thanks for watching.